growth and development care, everything from speech, audiology, dentistry, aesthetics, and more importantly, and that's one of the things my wife just took off for more training in, is self-esteem, because these kids are broken in here. We can put this kind of together, God heals it, and we're close, but they're broken in here because of all the ridicule that they get in school. So the self-esteem programs are part of this. So these are sustainable projects. I made a commitment not to allow surgical safaris into our world, and we set up these teams, and they are sustainable. They go on for 20, 30 years. One of our 1,000 Smiles that I set up way back in 1984 and 85, I had the pleasure of handing away a baby at 20 in marriage, because you're able to follow the children all the way through. Her father had passed away. He was a diver for lobsters, and had a compression injury and died. So we had bonded so much over the years that she invited me to be her patron. So these are incredibly linking families, and even the children become friends with each other, because you got to remember, these kids there's not a lot of clefts necessarily in their school, and they're the ones being singled out. They're the ones with a funny face, and they're being put down. So when they come to a clinic and they see others like that, they say, well, maybe there is some normalcy here. And then with the self-esteem programs, they're taught to forgive the other kids on, that's the most important thing, actually, is the forgiveness releases them. And my wife really has a great way of doing this, because she says, well, you don't know that child is going home to a father that's an alcoholic, or a mother that's abusing, or whatever. So she goes into all of that, and she was the biggest addition to our program, and came in only about 10 years ago, and I've been doing this 35 years. So it's really a blessing, and I would say she does a lot more than we do. But what I like, let's see if I can get rid of that thing, clean up files. What I like is that after retirement, I was a craniofacial surgeon for many years, and you kind of gather this cadre of people that people you've trained. Now some of those people have gone on to become professors and training other people, and you don't want to step away from that and just go to the beach and have a cigar and a whiskey? You're going to do that all your life? So I'm not big on golf. I wasn't very good at it. I'll love to go to the 19th hole with y'all. But I figured this is a really great thing for, as we retire, you can look at all of what you're doing in your growth and development in your professions now. The younger ones, the older ones, can look back at who they've worked with, and you can get involved with programs and make one for yourself, because as you start to participate in your professions, you're going to have this thing where you're developing a cadre of people, just like you're doing with the school, just like you're doing with these other issues, that you can interface with them, and then you don't fade into the sunset. You actually keep and become more energized as you go. So this is a personal story about Tecate Smiles. One of the things I liked was working in archaeological sites. I had an interest in that way back. And anthropologically, I found out that this happens to be in the Mayan area of Campeche. Calakmul is one of the earliest ruins, way before Tikal. They were the conquerors of that. And the Mayan community was developed in its golden age. The peak of their community and their civilization was between 400 BC and 400 AD. So that 800-year period had this tremendous development of culture. And they came all the way from the Chiqui Indians up in, and the tribes up in the northern part of South America, all the way up into what we know as the Yucatan, the base of the Yucatan. So the Rotary service that we provide in there really lets us know the people and the culture, and that's part of the beauty of what we do with this problem, because we ran into a tremendous volume of people and kids with clefts, much more than what we saw in other parts of the world. Just to give you an idea, cleft lip and palate deformity is 1 in 650 births from everything from south of Alaska, because Alaska is considered Asia, okay, so south of Alaska, all the way to the tip of Argentina at the bottom. That's all 1 in 650. So it's the same in the US as it is in Mexico, as it is in Nicaragua, as it is everywhere. It's just that they don't have a children's service down the street that takes care of them early, and so you see them around the streets. In Asia, from Alaska all the way through India and over into all the rest of Asia, it's 1 in 350. It's double the incidence, okay? So we have our hands full there with our India project. And then Africa and Scandinavia are about the same, 1 in 1,100. Now go figure, right? You got the super blondies and you got the dark skin, but they've got about 1 in 1,100. It's half as frequent, all right? So it's interesting that we found this pocket of an incredible volume of cases, and it was because the culture of the Maya revered the cleft as holy or God-kissed. And you can see here on this relief on one of the ruins, I happened to catch a picture of that in Chetumal, and it shows this depiction that looks strange, and it correlates to the cleft. And how we know that is we start to go to the archaeological museums, and you see this jade adze from Mexico, from the Mayan community, and this is depicting the jaguar god. All right, that's one of the most powerful gods in the Mayan culture. And why would a jaguar god be related to a cleft lip? Well, because the jaguar lip is clefted, right? It's the cat lip. So that's why they call it hair lip, cat lip, whatever. It's a jaguar. You can see the bilateral cleft on this jade adze very much matches on a cleft lip and palate. And as I started to get into this, I began to put the correlations together, and I published a little bit and presented at the American Cleft Lip and Palate Association. It's very interesting, but more importantly, imagine if they think this is holy. So they've got these kids and they grow up and they're little mini gods, right? Because they put them over here in this little city, and then all the governors stand in front of them and say, the gods need more corn, go out and work and then bring it back. Doesn't that sound like our Congress, So that's what happened. And back in these little mini god or royalty cities, the genetics got stronger and stronger, all right? So you do see a higher incidence in certain pockets of Central America, and that happens to be right now. We call a project, it's called Mayan Smiles, and Tricia is one of our lead nurses that helped us start that project. Tricia in your club is one of our lead nurses all around. She's just tops and really helps us, tremendously. Well, Smiles International Foundation has been around for over 30 years. 1987 is when it was started. Its mission is to provide excellence in education and charitable surgical care. Why education? Because we go into these communities and we put on symposiums, we grab their doctors and send them for residency programs in the US, and we provide them instrumentation through Rotary so that they can do this all year round. So it's sustainable, it fulfills our motive. We want the kid treated from birth until all the way till they're a functioning adult, entering society and doing something useful for them. So this happens to be our little Max from Ukraine. We have a project in Dnepropetrovsk. That is a little bit on hold right now due to Putin, but we'll go into that later. So Rotary works hand in hand with Smiles International Foundation. I said before, virtually every one of our projects, I partner with Rotary. It is not a Rotary Foundation. Neither is Smiles International. 1,000 Smiles. It just happens to partner with Rotary. And what I do is I'll set up these teams and make them self-sufficient. 1,000 Smiles is self-sufficient at this time. Some of our other projects are self-sufficient, but we go back in and we help them if they have broken instruments or this or that. We work, I said already, with self-esteem program. This doesn't show on here, so I apologize. Self-esteem programs, books, and that sort of thing. My wife is an artist and she writes children's books. She sells them and then buys stitches and gauze for the kids, in addition to doing the self-esteem programs with the other clinical training. We put on the US accredited continuing education because our foundation is actually registered to be able to do that with the Department of Education in the United States. We can put on CME or CE or CNE for nurses or whatever. So every person that comes that needs a professional continuing education can go home with a certificate signed by our organization that gives them continuing education. That does several things. One, it raises the quality of the education we give to the doctors in the community or the nurses or whoever, because we'll bring in professors to operate and work with us, and then they give their you know, everybody's got a canned talk, right? So you bring that in and you give a nice lecture. But it also gives these people a chance to use the time that they normally would have gone for a continuing education course and paid for, and they get it for free because they're donating their own flight time. Every trip, Tricia pays her own flight, her own hotel, all the food, everything else, and takes time off, right? So that's every one of our participants and volunteers. So that does help. The other is that we organize, this is where Rotary steps in. We organize the mission and project clinics, and we buy the equipment and supplies, and we get a lot of this at cost or, you know, really super discount. Occasionally, like we had in India, we'll build a clinic and we're all excited. We're doing all this fancy stuff. The kid, you know, you're feeling really good, and they go home and die of dysentery. You know, fortunately, ours didn't die, but they got sick, and it made you a little embarrassed that we didn't really check the foundation of that particular clinic, and they had E. coli in their water at the hospital. Now, that's not so cool. And I can give you another talk someday on our water projects that we went back in the following year, and I used my engineering friends from the UCSD when I was in engineering I was talking to you about, and we built them up a water system for their village of 6,000 people, the mission school, and the orphanage of 450 kids, and we were able to give them water now system for that. So we occasionally will get involved with Water for Life, and we'll do that as part of it. Where we've served, we've been in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, Pichucalco, Mexico, Ensenada with our 1,000 Smiles, that's currently going, Tecate, Mori, India, David, Panama, San Jose, Costa Rica, that's an active one, and at the Children's Hospital. Dnepropetrovsk, Ukraine, and Dneprodzerzhinsk, Ukraine, I mentioned, are on hold right now because they are 90 miles from Donetsk, which is where the bombs are dropping, and they ask us if we maybe should delay a little bit. I agree. Then Kokoti, Ivory Coast, Africa, Aleppo, those are actually building up hospitals with clean water systems. I learned my lesson in India, and then we'll go back in and build the hospital. But they had a change of government, and there was blood in the streets, and so I said, when you get it figured out, we'll come back. Santa Abelina in Guatemala, and then some local ones. But our current active programs that we spend most of our time at right now, we have 10 current active clinics, and that is in San Jose, Costa Rica, Mori, India, Tecate, Baja California Norte, and Cabo San Lucas, Baja Sur, and then of course our Calakmul, Ixpujil, Campeche, Mexico with the Mayan Smiles. Those are our current 10 clinics. Every year we're off doing those. This just shows an example of what the district grant can do, a simple 3,000 times 2, and then we get 50% off of the instrumentation, so 3,000 turns into $12,000 worth of instrumentation, kicks it off and gets the doctor there in Campeche for the Mayan Smiles started. Well, after 20 years setting up and founding the 1,000 Smiles and sitting on the board, I was called over to Tecate in 2005 to get something started there by some of our colleagues, and it was primarily through a friend of mine that was with the Flying Samaritans, and I used to be part of the Flying Samaritans back when I was flying for Camp Pendleton, and that was fun. But it turns out that they had an ophthalmology clinic, and they wanted somebody to put in anesthesia machines. They knew I was boarded in anesthesia also first, and they thought, well, why don't you help us get this started so we can do strabismus? And I said, well, sure, but we're also going to do clefts because I hear there's a lot of problem around here. We need to help. There's no shortage of children to treat. We're getting calls anywhere between 5 and 6 new clinics to start every year, and I can't do them all, so we've got to make them self-sufficient, and I'm grooming the surgeons and professors to take over at these various clinics, and eventually I will retire from retirement also, and maybe go sit on that beach and have a whiskey. All right, so that's basically what we found. Now, several Rotary matching grants provided equipment to get that one rolling. Here you can see with one of our club presidents, giving the first set of equipment into that one, like we did in Calakmul, and then updated the instrumentation because over time, Tricia gets on my case, says, here's my wish list, Jeff, here's my wish list. So we'll write a grant sometimes to give her the instrumentation that she needs to get the doctors everything. And then we were called down to Cabo San Lucas, the same thing. So I've learned, based off of this particular site, that it's one thing to say I'm going to go somewhere and then push the door open. It's another thing to have the door open, and the Lord opens the door, you get vacuumed right through it. I mean, this thing started within 3 months. I was notified in Costa Rica while I was at another project, and it was because one of my Rotarians was doing a makeup at this timeshare in Cabo. And you know, there was a meeting, and he was chit-chatting with somebody over their iced tea, and the next thing I know, he says, hey, they've got a problem in the back hills because there's a lot of people turning down the beds that don't have any health care. And they come over by ferry, and they're living up in the hills. And so consequently, that thing just, boom, it was done, it was funded, and we got it started all within 3 months. So we got that grant going, we got the equipment going, and Cabo Smiles began. Our surgeries take place during about a 2 to 4 day operating window. Each of those days, we do as much as we can. Excuse me, I'm still on Italy time. And this one in Cabo goes, you know, Saturday to Saturday. So, you know, we're operating 4 days. We leave 1 day for any emergencies or anything like that. But generally, you can do a dozen cases in a day. So you might get between 25 and 40 cases done on a given clinic. And I'll go over the numbers of that. This is one of our children. You can see the dad before and just after. This is literally in recovery room right here. And then, you know, really, when the parents saw that child come into recovery, it just tightens your throat. I mean, no words are needed. They're just absolutely phenomenally happy. And then about a year later, this is the child with all the work that's done. And of course, we're following him with dentistry and looking at the area where the cleft was so that we could put in some bone, maybe a dental implant when he gets older, or put in the bone while the tooth buds or the permanent teeth start to erupt in. There's all kinds of strategies. Generally, you operate the lip at about 10 weeks of age. Now, some of these go later. I've had the opportunity to operate on a 61-year-old man with his granddaughter simultaneously. They both had clefts because it's a familial base. You ask the etiology, generally it's genetic. Of course, it can happen with if you take drugs or fetal alcohol, or if you have nutrition problems or dehydration. But in general, the highest reason is for genetics. It passes down. If a woman has a cleft child, she has a 25% chance of having another one. And that cleft child has a higher incidence of clefts within the family. That's just the way it is. Then there's also ones that are, we just don't know why they happen. It just starts to the gene pool. So, like I was saying, these kids, I happen to have a picture of this. These kids meet each other at this clinic. And then they come back. Our clinics are sometimes 3 and 4 times a year. So they look forward to it. And go figure, right? And they look forward to it. They get to meet their friends. They get to color. They get to have the goodies. Not all of the time. It's a dice shoot whether they have to go to surgery or not. So they figure it's worth it, you know, to go show up. And here they are, you know, these people, these kids just go through, and as they grow, they see now that other children have that, and they go through the lessons in self-esteem, and it really develops them. It's a blessing to be able to see these kids grow. It's all about team effort, and I'm glad to hear you were in Interact, and were you in Rotaract also?
Yes.
All right, so we involve the Rotaract with our projects. We give them things like, you know, play with the kids, do soccer, route the cases. There's all kinds of things for non-surgeons to do at these clinics. But as they go, some of our Rotaracts, both sides of the border, this is Tecate and one up at Miracosta, they sometimes will go off and get training. They're enthused, they're inspired, like you were in Rotary. We've had them come back as anesthesiologists, nurse anesthetists, nurses, dentists. One came back as an ENT surgeon. So sometimes they'll go off and then they have it in here that that's what they want to do before they get trapped into the grind, you know, trying to pay for the country club or whatever it is. So I try to tell them that when I ran my practice, I knew what I went into it for. And so I built that in with 3 months off a year doing mission work. And of course I had to fire one accountant because he told me how much that cost me. And I said, that's not what I asked you for. And by telling me now you're gonna put a doubt in my mind. The reason I work is, of course, kids gotta go to school, gotta get some college, maybe have a retirement so my wife isn't mad at me. And then we do this. This is why we do this. This is why I went into it. So that's what we try to put into our future generation. Okay, let's get into the money. All right, so combining the Cabo Smiles and Tecate Smiles, I just grabbed 2 clinics out of last year, all right? So it was 89 surgical procedures on 34 children. So we break it out into unbundle it, let's put it that way. So you might do 2 or 3 procedures on a kid, taking advantage of them going to sleep under pediatric anesthesia. Why have them come back 3 times when you can get more done at once? So we'll do that on these. We'll combine as much as possible because they do need to be staged in a certain way. But that's why you see that 89 and 34 children. And that was done with 5 total surgical days. And the estimated relative value in the US was $422,000 if it were to be billed out at the Children's Hospital or at our surgery center at Sharp or whatever. The sterile and surgical supplies expense was $13,000. And that's where Tricia helps me a lot because she gets that cut down probably by half by working with the large hospitals. And our nursing friends put us onto the order of the big hospital, and our small order is bought at a larger volume order. That's cool. Very cool. And so we've got $13,000 expense, knock that off of there. The net value of that was $409,000. Not bad for 2 missions. And we're doing 10. And for what? An investment of some of these equipment. And then, of course, we don't add in all the doctor's time, the nurses, etc., because that's given. That's all donated. So it's a great bang for the buck. Now, here's a project that you're in. Your club is actually participating in this. And I'll explain how you came up with your 3,000, but I know that you'll have more fundraisers in the future. But basically, the financial alchemy of Rotary is phenomenal. It really is. And this is a straight district grant. This is like the easiest thing in the world to do, believe it or not. As opposed to global grant, it gets a little more sticky. But especially when you're in areas where the district governor is not there and you got to have a final signing, each of these grants has to have a closure before you get another one. That's something that you guys will, because you're pretty active here. I just saw 3 grants being talked about. Each one of those has to be closed before you get another one. You can have a certain number in the mill, like you've got the global going 3 years in a row, so you'll be all right there. But the Rotary Club of Carlsbad pitches in $3,000 from fundraiser. The district designated fund, DDF, comes from all of us giving and becoming a Paul Harris Fellow, right? You throw your $1,000, become a Paul Harris Fellow, or you buy one for your wife or your kid or this or that, and they get the medal and you give them an honor. Or you start some of the young kids off and they learn about Rotary and you give them a Paul Harris Fellow. Those monies go to Rotary International, and a portion of that comes back to the district. And the district can divide it up however it wants. Our district has chosen to take our number of clubs, 70 something, I forgot, and divide it equally, so you get 3,000 apiece. That's the nut, all right? And so that matches the 3,000 of our club. Now, we actually had $9,000 that could have gone to this. So, because we had this big Oktoberfest. By the way, next year, Oktoberfest, the first weekend in October, that's RC. Oh, and the Paella and Wine Festival, did you learn about that?
No, but
okay,
please.
Tecate has for $35. You go to this Paella cook-off in Tecate, in the wine, just above the wine valley, and all the wineries bring up their wines, and the paella is brought out, and that money goes to schools. I thought, that goes a little differently. But that's a good festival. It's the first weekend in June. Okay, so in Carlsbad High Noon, we gave them $3,000 so that we could use their $3,000 district grant match. Is that legal? Yes, it is. Philippe confirmed that, and so did Mark School. That's why I think. Because I needed a higher match for this grant because there's a large amount of equipment needed to do the facial bone reconstruction on these kids. Once they've gone through the lip, the palate, the nose, the this, the that, they need their whole facial structure rearranged, and that takes a fair amount of equipment. So then the global grant, that's you, Global Rotary Club of San Diego, right? Is that the official name?
It's a little bit backwards.
So what should it be? I'll change it.
Yeah, Rotary E-Club of San Diego Global.
Okay, so I need to put global, Rotary E-Club San Diego Global,
Yes.
right? I'll change that in a heartbeat.
Okay.
It's done. And I'll do that before
Okay.
it goes on to
It's the same thing.
SlideShare or whatever.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I was gonna ask that, but I kept going after Trish and I couldn't get a response. She was in
Okay.
the operating room or something. And so, again, it was, thank you for allowing us to use your district designated fund. That made it happen. because then in Rotary Club of San Marcos, so they're a new club, and they could only come up with 1,000. So I could throw in 2 and get my, a couple of these Rotaract kids that are really star people, and one of my anesthesiologists, I'd just buy them a Paul Harris Fellow, and you take it out of your tithe money or whatever, however you want to figure it. It goes in and matches, and we end up with 3, and then we get the 3, and there's 24,000. That's not enough for this set. So because of my old days when I used to work in all the hospitals here, you work with instrument companies, the hospital wears out their equipment, they need to be replaced. It's usually they go to the surgeon and say, what's your favorite stuff, your left-handed skyhook, and I need to get it from this company. And so then they appreciate that over the years. When you get out and retire, you go back and lean on them. And you say, hey, you owe me. Besides, they have foundations within their companies too. All these corporations have that. So we were able to get a bonus match from the equipment manufacturer, getting a 2-for-1 match. So we got $48,000 worth of equipment, which takes care of kids like this that have grown up, and now their jaws, because of the clefts in the upper face, are disproportionately grown. We need to disassemble all that. We go inside the mouth and do it all from within. It's microsurgery, and then we rearrange the bones, but we need that equipment. So that's where the Smiles Takati has grown these children over the past 10 years, and now they're ready for that. So there's so many to treat with your love, are all over the place. And this is just one of the poster kids, the first case done in Cabo, and I just say that your club, I want to thank you for your participation in that. So that's
Okay.
Eat.
Well, we want to thank you for coming, and for not just that, but really for doing everything he does. I mean, when you look at these pictures, really think about it. I mean, think about waking up every morning and looking at yourself and feeling like, someone else. And now, thanks to the work that this grant is doing, people now look at themselves in the mirror and say, look at me. And I'm sure it takes time, and as you mentioned, it's a process, but it's quite, amazing how these people really have a new chance to look at themselves and really to see life in a different way. And I just am so thankful for everything that you do, the team does, because it's a lot of sacrifice. Same with Maxie. When you talk about these projects and you look at the pictures, it's like, oh great, these kids are all the way who knows where, but it's like, these are people. These are people that are right now living with these problems, and when you really see the difference that we are doing, because not just Jeff, but every single person here is actually doing a difference by being a Rotarian. And so I really, thank you for coming here to spend your evening with us last minute. This is a little token for you to have a coffee in our name.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And I hope that all of us here, or at least some of us, can partake in perhaps going to Tecate. We don't all have to be in the medical field to do something. Some of us, each and every one of us here has different skills, whether it's speaking Spanish, whether it's being a teacher, whether it's about knowing, psychology or something that I'm sure we can help.
Absolutely.
And
Let's
so-
talk more about that, because I'm
Yes.
going next Thursday morning. I go to the Tecate Rotary. I'm going to sit down,
please.
and I'm talking about our club wanted to do something extra, but there's only so many volunteers that can clog a clinic. So what we do is we have side projects. While that's